So I'm just going to hit record now. Everybody, good afternoon, and a really warm welcome this lunchtime to our first People Hub session of our new business year. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob Rees. I am the CIPD Vice Chair for the Northern Ireland Committee, and I am working alongside some fabulous members of our committee in pulling this event for you to get together today. So we have Orla Key, who's going to help. Apologies, Sky News going off in the background. Orla Key is going to be facilitating the panel discussion, and helping us with the technology in the background is Alison and Ailish from the committee as well. So they have pulled this event together. I'm just giving you a bit of waffle at the top of the session. So we've got a really fun-packed 90 minutes for you this lunchtime. We've got 4 incredible speakers lined up on a real key area that you all told us that you're really interested in, which is organisational design and development. We are joined first by Aideen O'Neill, who is a senior OD and HR consultant with Think People, based in Belfast, and she's got a really interesting background in a variety of different change projects from a variety of different organisations, from multinationals and local non-profits. We're also joined from the BBC by, more people joining. We are also joined by Susan Lovell from the BBC, who is part of their culture team, and she's going to be delivering a session, case study for us, and she is the leader of the culture team, who are really delivering a wide range of change and improvements to the employee experience at the BBC. Probably the most challenging company name to pronunciate this. So Aoife, I apologise in advance if I get this wrong, but you're coming up after me, so I'm sure you'll correct me if I do. But first up, presentation-wise today, we have Aoife Teenan from Alagi, which is the Greek word for change. I know that, but I might not have pronounced it correctly, so I apologise in advance. And Aoife has spent more than a decade working in organisational design in a variety of different organisations, and spent time doing significant transformations. And finally, we are also joined by Faye Weir, who recently joined a company called T3 as principal consultant, after spending time working for NatWest, where she led the entrepreneurship and innovation curriculum as delivery lead. So we are really delighted to have those speakers with us today. They are going to give you, or Aoife and Susan are going to give you 2 case studies or introductions to what they've done. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Aoife. Aoife, it is over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And thanks for that introduction. I'm just going to get my slides set up here. I hope you can all see them.
Apologies if I mispronounced the company.
Oh, you're fine. It's Alagi, yeah, Greek word for change. So yeah, thanks for that introduction, Rob, and I'm delighted to be here. As you said, I've worked in the area of organisation design for quite a while now, in a variety of different roles, both in consultancy capacity and large-scale consultancies. I've worked internally as a head of organisation design, and then I'm back in the world of consulting now in Alagi. So happy to share with you a little bit of my experiences that I've gained along the way. I will take you through, I suppose, a case study, first of all, and then also a little bit about some kind of practical tips and hints for when you're doing your own organisation design project. But first, I thought it's just good to just set the scene with a definition of what do we mean by organisation design. And the European Organisation Design Forum I have this definition, which I really like, and there's kind of 3 key parts to it. So they define organisation design as a systematic and holistic approach to aligning and fitting all parts of an organisation together to achieve its strategic aims. So what are we talking about there? We're talking about the first part really is around the approach, and there being, I suppose, a methodology and a process to go through to actually undertake an organization design project. The second part there, just to call out, really is around the fact that it talks about all parts of an organization. So we're talking wider than structure and organization charts. We're also talking about aligning strategy with structure, with processes, with people and rewards. And the final part then I've highlighted there is really around the strategic intent. And that's so important. When you're doing a piece of organization design work, it's very much to be rooted in the strategy of the organization or what the organization is trying to achieve. So with that kind of as our starting point, I thought it was useful really to just give you a sense of some of the common triggers for organization design. And the first one just to call out really is when there's a significant internal or external impact or event. I suppose if we just take the last couple of years alone, we've had COVID and going further back, the financial crash, and those type of events will often signal changes within an organization. So if we think about COVID and how many organizations really had to pivot overnight their business model from being in person to online, maybe in some cases they changed what they produced and how they produced it. We had a lot of organizations producing ventilators and PPE, hand sanitizer and so on. They really had to pivot their work model overnight to be able to respond to the external environment. So that will have involved a change to their organization design. Other external impacts that you could have could be the introduction of regulation in a sector. So we'll be often involved with clients where regulation has been introduced and they need to do their work a little bit differently. They might need to introduce quality controls, reporting, and so on. And then sometimes in the public sector, what we'll see is that public sector organizations are being asked to take on additional remit. So I would have worked in the past with the Commission for Energy Regulation in Ireland when they were asked to take on regulation of the water sector, or with the Road Safety Authority when they were asked to take on responsibility for driver licenses and really overhauling the driver license issuing process in Ireland. So that's kind of your external impacts, internal impacts. Then also you'll have a trigger for organization design is when you have a change to an organizational strategy or purpose. If organizations have changed their strategy, they're moving from an emphasis in one area to another. Again, that will have an impact on how they structure themselves and organize themselves to be able to deliver against that strategy. And the third common trigger that we see is when the strategy may remain the same, but something in the environment has changed so that the way the organization is currently structured isn't really suffice to deliver against the strategy. So it calls for a change in structure and change in design. So they're the common triggers, that's the definition. I'm going to give you a quick overview of a case study next, and then get into those kind of practical hints and tips. The case study example I'm going to talk to you about is from a number of years ago, but it's a nice meaty one, so I felt it would give you some good kind of examples of the process we underwent and the things that we need to think about. So the client in this case was a large Irish domestic bank with about 10,000 or so employees. And we were looking at a restructure for one significant part of the organization. And that part of the organization dealt with a large impaired loan book. So it's about 1,500 or so of those 10,000 employees. So maybe just to give you a bit of context before I jumped into the project that we did there. Around the time of the financial crash, this organization would have discovered it had a large impaired loan book. It needed to put in place a solution to be able to really recover some of those assets that were at risk, but it also needed to do that in a way that was mindful of the customers and the clients. So that was the kind of crisis moment that hit this bank, and they needed to set up a unit to deal with that. They set up the unit. For the first several years, the unit was spending their time trying to get a handle on the size and scale and the profile of those impaired loans. And I was trying to bring the right skill sets together to be able to a deep dive into each of those loans to be able to understand the situation and also the appropriate solutions to be able to recover the debt and get the client back into a financially viable position. So as I say, that was the history and the context. And so roll forward a number of years and a much different scenario. The bank had a really deep understanding of the situation from with regards to the profile of the loan book. They had built up huge expertise in credit management in a really skillful mix of employees that they had brought together. But because they had worked through the solutions and the scenarios for their clients, they had reached a different point of inflection in the operating model. So they needed to begin to wind down that part of the bank, and they needed to begin to think about how do they move some of the really great skills they developed within the bank into other parts of the bank, and also, I suppose, downsize as well. So it's quite a lot going on, and that's where we came in. So the ask was to design a new operating model that would be fit for purpose, a new org structure to complement that, and look at a model to make sure that we were bringing the right skills from that workforce with us into the future and to support a voluntary redundancy program. So what did we do? We would have spent a lot of time up front to say, understanding that context, understanding that strategic ambition of the unit, and beginning to then talk about the work. What was the work that they needed to be doing in the future as part of their new operating model, as part of the new processes? Spent a lot of time understanding that, doing out the value streams and so on. We also spent a lot of time sitting down with some of the key business team on the data side to understand, okay, how is the profile of the loan book intending to evolve over time? Because we needed to design an operating model and org design that was going to evolve as the unit, began to wind down. And then we also, the third part on the people side, is began to really understand the skills and profiles of the employees there, and to think about the skills and profiles that we were going to need as part of the future operating model. So a lot of workshops, some high level designs pulled together initially, approvals gotten internally for the concepts for the models, before we got into detailed design and detailed modeling. So that project took about a year and a half, and I've just given it about 90 seconds there. So there's a lot involved in it, quite detailed. But one of the key things maybe to call out that we did along the way was had a lot of gave a lot of thought to, suppose, change management. We had to make sure that we brought the hearts and minds of those impacted employees with us along the journey. So that was really key. So we would have looked at various different initiatives at the design stage and at the implementation stage to really bring those employees with us, involving, we had a great internal communications team who would have been great at helping us craft the key messages, run sessions with the leaders to get them prepared for and ready to deliver the messages to the impacted employees. So that's just to say, quick case study. Can take questions on that when it comes to the panel piece, it's no problem. I thought then, just to bring it down to a kind of practical level, I'd share with you a few different lessons. My colleagues and I have had a bit of fun lately, dipping our toe into the world of social media and LinkedIn, albeit late in the day, and we have pulled together a number of articles which are exactly to that point, because we get asked quite a lot about practical tips about organization design. So I'm just going to take you through a few of those.
Aoife, just before you get cracking with the next slide, can I just check that everybody's audio is working? If you can just give me a quick thumbs up using your little emojicon. I'm getting some reports of people not being able to hear, but I can see lots of thumbs going up in the chat. So I will go back on mute and hopefully not steal your thunder too much. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's all right. Okay, so the first point, just to call out as the tip when it comes to organization design, is that you really need to understand the strategic direction of the organization, or the subset of the organization that you're working on. So when I'm starting a piece of organization design, I'll spend a lot of time understanding the strategy, the purpose of the organization, why they exist, the vision, where they're trying to go to, the success measures, and so on. But I'll also spend a lot of time trying to understand the competitive advantage of the organization. And by that, what I'm trying to understand is, why do customers choose this organization over other organizations? And there's a really good Harvard Business Review article, and you see reference there, which talks about three main drivers of competitive advantage. And it's really important from an organization design perspective to understand those up front, because they have and they impact upon how you look to group the work at that kind of high level within the organization. So the three main drivers are operational excellence, product leadership, and customer intimacy. And operational excellence, if you think of organizations in that space, we're really talking about your Ryanairs or your Lidl. So they are obviously very effective at what they do, but they do it in a way that's very cost effective and attractive to the customer from a cost perspective. And they often do that by kind of pushing a lot of the work onto the customer. So if I am booking a flight with Ryanair, I will have to, book it myself. I'll pay extra for my bag, pay extra for my seat, and so on. But I'll do that because I'm getting a good, cheap flight. So when I think about cheap flights, I think about Ryanair. When I think about product leadership, obviously, I don't have to reach much further on my iPhone here to think about Apple and or Dyson as well from a vacuum cleaner perspective. But organizations that are good at a product leadership perspective will put a lot of focus on R&D. They stay ahead of the curve from the market perspective by kind of always changing little things to make their product more attractive and so on. And customer intimate organizations then are organizations who, they're the hardest to describe, but they know their customers almost better than the customers know themselves. So for example, if I was wealthy enough now to afford a Rolls Royce in the morning, if I was to go in, they will sit down, they will understand all of my requirements and design the perfect car for me. When I come back in a couple of years' time, they'll still have those requirements. They'll understand. They'll say, "Aoife, what you really want now is, this type of a car." So they understand my needs, and they know my needs, and they predict the next next thing of my interest. So why that's important is when you begin to look at the organization design and how you might group work, understanding the competitive advantage will be really important to understand whether you group the work by customers or by products or by value chain and so on. So that's why it's a really important place to start. Second point I want to just call out as a tip when it comes to organization design is to create some design criteria. And by design criteria, what I mean is a design criteria, so as I say there, will set out what the new design must do well and identify the problems that must be solved for. So sometimes you see in organizations where you come in, they'll say, "I have the solution to this." And they've gone straight to the answer, and they haven't actually stood back and understood or thought about, what is it that I need this organization to do for me? So in describing why we need design criteria, I often use the analogy of engaging an architect. So when you sit down with an architect, you don't just say, "Can you redesign my house?" You sit down and say, "I need you to redesign my house in order that I have room for my 2 kids, my dogs, I can run my business, etc." So you give the big, long, detailed wish list of, "This is what I need you to do in how you redesign my house." And when you do that, the architect will come back with a proposal which should, meet your needs. And that's why you need to take the same amount of, time and work in the beginning to have an organization design process to really begin to be really clear on what is it that you're trying to achieve with this organization design. Because without that, it's very hard to weigh up whether one option is better than another. And it can be hard. It can take time when you're sitting down with a client to get them to really work through that process, but it is invaluable. And if we don't do it, you will find when you get to further down the track that you can't evaluate whether this design is going to fully meet your needs or not. Third point really is when it comes to organization design is to follow the work. Often you will find that people, or when you go into organizations, they'll start with the people. They'll say, I have a great guy as my head of sales, or I have a great, head of marketing. And we'll always say, I don't want to hear about the people. I want to understand the strategy. I want to understand your competitive advantage. And I want to look at the work. What is the work that we need to do to be able to achieve all of that? So I think we list out kind of the golden rules there, but the first place to start is to have a number of workshops to spec out the value chains for the work that needs to be done to realize the strategy. Then you're going to take a step back. You're going to look at your design criteria, your competitive advantage, and look at various different options as to how you might group that work. And depending on your strategy, depending on your competitive advantage, you may look to group that work by product, by customer, by geography, by value chain, and so on, other options. And once you have, segmented the work, then you begin to think about the roles that are needed within that team to be able to deliver that work. And then finally, you think about who should do the work. So it's work first, and then people later in the day. And that's not to say that you don't consider people's needs and all of that, very mindful of that, but you need to start beginning with looking at the strategy and the work that needs to be done to realize that. And then we work through how we populate that strategy, or how we populate that organization design. The next tip is just really around org charts, not anti-org charts, but just what a real kind of call out here is that, I suppose, as an org design expert, SME, it's not the first thing that I reach for. It's not the first thing I do when I'm designing an organization. Very much what we would reach for instead, and we design instead, is an org model. And that's a visual representation which tells the picture as to how the work will be organized, how information flows, how relationships between different teams will happen, how decisions are made, and so on. So an organization model like that, it stays current for a long time. It stays current with the strategy, whereas org charts, they will tell you people, they will tell you reporting lines, they will change all the time, and they don't tell you how the work gets done within an organization. So for me, drawing an org chart is something I do later in the process rather than upfront. Next point, really just to call out, is really that point around change management. And I can't underestimate, I suppose, this point enough, as in it's really, really, really important to bring in as many people as you can to the design process and co-create as much as possible. And there are lots of opportunities and points along the design process where you can bring people in. You can have focus groups in the beginning. You can have design groups where you're testing and working through options. And then you have to have a change management plan that will guide you and take you through the implementation phase, the announcement of an org structure, and thinking about the impact on people of what you need to do to manage people's expectations. Because it is the people who are going to bring this organization design to life. So you really need to get their input. They know the organization really well, probably some of the detail about it and some of the senior leadership team. So it's just vital. Next point then really is just, I suppose, to say, the devil is in the detail from an organization design perspective. If we think about kind of the very nature of the work, you are putting boundaries around work, and that in itself is creating silos. And if you were to stop your organization design work at that level of, we've identified the new teams and new roles, and you don't think about how it's all going to work together and fit together, you risk just creating silos, and you risk that the organization won't be as effective as you would like it to be. So one of my colleagues, Anne, has a lovely little analogy here around, when you're doing organization design, it's like cutting out a pattern. So But in the beginning, you've cut out the pattern, you have your sales team, your manufacturing team, distribution team, and so on. But now this part here is really, how do you sew them together? So what is it you need to do to make sure those teams are going to work together? And it might be that you need to think about service level agreements between teams, shared objectives, handover meetings, and so on, to make sure that they will all work together. But it really is a kind of key part of the process. And sometimes people tend to stop a little bit earlier with I have the org chart, away I go. And if you don't do this point, you risk the organization design not actually delivering all that you needed to do. Final point for me then really is just to say that, yes, org design can be messy. And what do I mean by that? So, as a consultant, either internal or external, at the start of every project, you will have, your project plan, your methodology, and it'll look beautiful and linear. Do your discovery work, do your high level design work, do your detailed design, implementation, change management running underneath. But it's just really acknowledge that design is iterative, and you will have to spend lots of times in workshop to work through various different aspects and bits and pieces of the design to get it right. But in all the years that I've been working in this area, I just kind of reassure you that if you bring the right organizational knowledge, or design expertise or approach into the mix, as well as going as deep as you can from a co-creation process, the design, you will end up with the right result for the organization in the end. So that's where I was going to leave it. As I said, we've been dipping our toe into sharing a bit of our knowledge in organization design of late. And if you want to read some of those articles, you can find us on LinkedIn, Alaji Limited, and you'll find our articles up there. So it's good to talk to you all, and look forward to the panel discussion in a few minutes.
Rifa, thank you very much. Alaji. Yeah. Am I saying that right?
Perfect. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I was flooding the chat with a couple of my questions, and I can see we've got another member of our committee here as well, popping in some questions. So if there are any questions for our speakers, or any thoughts that come into your head as you're listening, we do really encourage you to help with the panel discussion and throw those questions into the chat. So enough really from me. I am going to hand over now to the BBC's, I feel like I'm on news at 10. I'm going to hand over to the BBC's Susan Level. Susan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, good, great. I'm just going to hide my little panel, and it's a really delight. Thank you ever so much, Aoife. That was fascinating as well, and this flows quite nicely from your presentation, because this is all messy. This is about people, so it's all messy. So BBC organisation development, we are dealing with people-centred change. It's messy, it's iterative, and it's unpredictable, and it's been a very useful exercise actually to try and distill what we've been learning from the projects that we're doing at the moment, to try and explain them to you. And there's actually a couple of my colleagues I see have joined me on the call, so if anything gets too tricky, I will be throwing to them for a little bit of insight as well. So it'll be useful to share with you what we've learned, and I think the kind of underpinning framework for why would we do any organisational development at all is we're there to help affect change. That's what it's for, to help an organisation become agile and make changes. And I wanted just to share a little bit of insight, and I'm going to go to the end first, which basically the end point is change is slow and then fast, and that's it basically. So if you take nothing else away, change is difficult and it's slow. But at the point at which you're in the slow bit, and boy, we're in that now, I can tell you, there are some things that you have to do that if you don't do, you're going to regret it, and you'll have to go back and do it later. Because if you don't bring your people with you on substantial transformative change, you won't be able to make it. It will not be sustainable, and it will not achieve the objectives on the lovely Gantt charts and on the product plans. We all know that because we know a little bit about human nature. So they basically, some people say they change slowly and then fast, kind of one conversation at a time. And what does that mean? It feels a bit lumpy, that. But what that means is that everybody has to ingest their own version of change. You know, if you're thinking about trying to get one person to change one activity, Rob, you were saying you have your son with you. One person, we're not going to infantilize our professional friends here, but imagine getting one person to change one behavior once. How many millions of neurons have to fire off? How many circumstances have to change in order for that to happen? And we show up, sometimes from HR, sometimes from OD, with the temerity to suggest that an organisation ought to change and we've got a plan. Well, look, it's not going to happen. It happens by getting people on board and having their hearts and minds involved. Obviously, in the background to all of that, there is a plan, there are mechanisms and there are stages, and it's very useful to have this at hand because, of course, we're not just making it up as we go along in OD. It is messy and iterative, but there is a plan. And I found this to be very, very useful. You kind of have to go slow in order to go fast, we found. So actually the entering and the contracting and the permission to become involved in people's plans, that's actually critically important. So getting permission to go in, the permission, if you like, is absolutely critical. Stage 2, diagnosing. And how you diagnose, what you're going to do, you're going to do one-to-one interviews, are you going to have town halls, are you going to get people write to you, you're going to have early adopters tell you what the problem is in an organisation. How you diagnose is absolutely critical too. And if you think about ever going to the doctor and ever needing to go to a specialist, sometimes you have to go down the chain to get the diagnosis right. And that's perfectly appropriate. Not everybody at GP level is going to get to the answer straight away. And then the intervening and taking action, that's not us intervening, that's enabling others to begin to do their interventions and begin to activate themselves in the interests of change. And what we found there, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit, is the only way that works is if they're working on a real business issue themselves that they want to fix, not your stuff, their stuff. And that's where the magic begins to happen, and it begins to feel that this work becomes relevant, because you've created an underpinning framework for how they're going to deal with their business problems by becoming involved. Evaluating feedback and insisting then that anybody who's doing any bit of change through their own intervention or taking action or they're leading their team, we insist that they give us the data back. We want them to tell us how they're getting on, even if it's not working. That data is the gold for a project involving change. And we have to allow people to do stuff that doesn't work. And then finally, I don't really agree with this bit of the model. It's not termination and exit. It's really handing off any work into business as usual and beginning to create a kind of a virtuous circle with what you're doing. So that's kind of in the background. I think also in the background is, what else have you got that you can use when trying to affect change in an organisation? And I kind of put myself there for a moment. Not because I'm great, and my background, by the way, is not HR and it's not OD, it's journalism, it's television commissioning, it's radio stations, and it's kind of leadership and things like that. But the use of the self when it comes to organisational change is absolutely critically important, because if you are not believing that an organisation is able to change and travelling, hopefully, then how is a senior management team that's busy, that's embattled, ever going to come on board with you? So there's something about how you use yourself, the narrative you tell, the words you say, who you are and what you are, that's actually really important. And I think it is critically important if you work in HR to begin, because you're not always, quite often the self is in the background, isn't it? You're there as a professional, you're there to deliver what other people want. I would encourage people to step into the space where you are and become kind of your own mini consultancy, even if you're internal. I think that's absolutely critical to how we affect change, actually. And I think that can make this work very enjoyable. And if you have to take yourself out of it, I think it can make it very mechanistic and less effective. I think my main thing I want to share is I think basic OD, and by that I mean organisational development, can be done by a checklist. I think about 80% of it, maybe 85% of it, but nobody ever has a checklist for this kind of change, the people bit. They have a checklist for every other single thing, but not this. So my encouragement to you would be to pick up some sort of checklist and start using it early when you're planning your organisational design. And that's because people don't actually really resist change. They just resist being changed, as we know. That's human nature. There's lots of data in behind all of that, all of the behavioral sciences. But people, when you tell them to do something, tend to not want to do it. They want to come to that themselves. They've got their autonomous beings. So we're good at other checklists, I think. And I've noticed really, the change checklist, all that change management stuff, like we are brilliant at that. And certainly at the BBC, we are too. The nature of the change, the business case, the vision, mission, the outcomes, the Gantt charts, what level of project management do we need? We do that absolutely instinctively and naturally. And actually we do this checklist quite well as well. What's the lead, do I have a plan? Are the basics in place? What does the leader need to think about while making this change? How do I support my team? That bit, I think over the last 15 years, we've become a lot better at, not the hierarchical version of leader change, but the more organic version. But I think organisation development and the key points around how people interact with the change you're proposing is begun quite late in the process, and it's called comms. And your change process will 100% fail if the first time somebody hears about it is in a comms, from internal comms. That is not going to work. So this is rare, and I think it's something that we could get better at. So question number one, who do we need to engage? I'm not a great believer in keeping these things secret. I don't think everybody needs to be engaged in everything, no way. And I don't think you need to upset people by saying you're about to change an organisation whole scale. But there are people other than us who will need to be engaged. Who are they? Have you really thought about it? Who are the early adopters for this? Who are the people who, if you weren't there, would be already saying this change needs to happen and should have happened 5 or 10 years ago? About 10% of your people will already be there, maybe 20. How can you fast track their support? And by that, I mean really fast track their support. What's required there? How do you encourage them then to feel that they own it? Do we need to make, changes to their job titles for a period of time? You say you're actually the implementation manager for some of this. Do we need to give them a sense that they're doing it, not you? And how can we help them manage the transition? So we're in this kind of grey area here of interventions. They will need help. What do they need? What support can you offer them as a centralising function that says, look, yeah, that would be great if you would do those one-to-one interviews for us, kind of help you set those interviews up. Simple stuff. Then are we listening to the critics, the people who said this, we've tried this before, it'll never work? Have we created the appropriate forum to listen to those people and to really genuinely learn from what they're saying, because they are telling you what you need to know, what upskilling is needed for these initial change ambassadors, and can we pull in expertise and other colleagues to help? And I found that as a checklist quite challenging. You think you've done it, and then you go back to the beginning, you think, I haven't really thought, not really, about who we need to engage. I've done a stakeholder map with all the usual suspects, but you know what, that person over there, if we could get them on board. And at the BBC, we've done this in the past, and quite often, it's people you would never think of. Presenters, some of the famous presenters, women presenters, have been so instrumental in calling out what needed to change at the BBC. They were never on any org chart ever about anything. So who are the people who really hold the power and sway, who'd be really interested in conversations with you about how an organisation should change? And this is basically what we're trying to achieve in OD, activating the self-energising commitment and energy of the people around you. Because you can't mandate behavioural change, as you know. You can't require it, you can ask for it, but actually you want people to energise themselves because they deeply believe that change is necessary and they can be a part of it. And that is where the magic of this lies. So very quickly, and it will be just really quick, and then I can pick up on things in the Q&A. The case study is we wanted to rewrite and relaunch the BBC values for all kinds of obvious reasons to do with the BBC's future, but also because we felt that provided the right kind of framework for discussion about change. And so that's the journey we've been embarking upon. A couple of my colleagues, Heather Palmer and Helen Murdoch, on this call have been involved and still are. And basically we rewrote the values along with the Director General and the board, etc. And dear Lord, that took 18 months of debate about words. So that was the work in the dark. That was the change happened slowly. But you know what? The process of discussion about words like truthful and honest was an important part of the framework we've now got that will come to life hopefully it comes to life on screen. And hopefully whatever you think of either the Queen or the coverage of the Queen, truthful, honest, impartial reporting is really what the BBC's brand is. And if we don't have that, we don't have anything. So those words had to be right, but the living out of those values had to be right. And hopefully we saw some of that in the last while. We know that companies that get their culture right can point to revenue growth. So there's plenty of good data in behind all of this. Why would we do it? And the task is really building a BBC that's creative, inclusive, and full of opportunity. And the flip side of that is if we don't do that, the mega media organizations that are now global with multiples of our income, the Amazons, the Googles, the Apple TVs, will simply dominate the space where a public service broadcaster in the UK used to exist. So it's not like it's nice to have, business critical. If we don't have that, we lose the talent. I used to work in Radio 4 and before that in local radio. And literally there was nowhere else to work if you're a radio producer. You might maybe work at downtown radio where I did, but you wouldn't work that for very long. The commercial sector didn't have boots broadcasting in it. Now you've got the pick of the podcasts of the world to work on. The battle for talent is massive. So we relaunched and rewrote our values, but the really important stuff was on the right-hand side there, just a very simple thing, which is we decided we would be much clearer about what you can expect from the BBC, and I mean much clearer, than what you can expect from the leaders in the BBC, much clearer, and then, and only then, what you can expect from everyone. And we've described that as a bit of a three-way handshake, and everyone has to shake together. But before we did that, we checked in on what you can expect from the BBC, and we realised that actually we needed our policies, our practice, what the EVP, the employee value proposition, we needed that to be massively improved. So Heather on this call has been absolutely instrumental in changing and supporting 18 massive policy shifts in the BBC. And so for a while, we went quite dark, we went quite slow, we went quite grey. We didn't bounce around and talk about values. And we try never to talk about culture because it just annoys people. And it means so many different things to so many different people. But at the end of that 18 months, we've got 18 really, really solid changed HR policy and practices. But the danger with that is people now think the work on culture and values is HR. So we've now got to unpick all of that to put it in the back room to say, do you know what, we've got this great stuff about how you can develop your career. That's not transformational change. Transformational change happens when you see a future and you move towards it, and we help you become agile and change how you work. And that's the bit that we're going to be doing over the next year. The bit that we've also concentrated on is what you can expect of leaders. And just to give you an example, you took that audience's value. We've written down, like we've never written anything down at the BBC. It's all, you're supposed to know it. We've written down what we expect of our leaders when it comes to delivering for audiences. And actually, we've not particularly, that sits on an internet site, we're not particularly shoved it in people's faces, but we will now use this as a framework for measurement of our leaders. And we've begun that in several ways, one of which is we've created a senior leader index, which is pretty unheard of in an organisation where your product, your programme speaks for itself. That's the measure, and the audience, number of audiences is the measure. The Senior Leader Index is actually a score about how you scored on several indices to do with being a senior leader. So that's incredibly countercultural. We've done it coming up for 3 times. The first time, a couple of people, there was a kind of sharp intake of breath. What do you mean a score? And by the second time around, people are asking, how can I improve my score? And third time around, it may be, can you mark me on something else as well? So it's very interesting. That in itself is a big, big cultural shift. And it's not a stick to beat senior leaders with, but you can see how it might have been perceived as that. But the cultural change will be as we begin to use the language of measurement about how you behave, you can begin to move that down the organisation so that by the time it gets to a busy person in BBC Radio Foil, and you'll say, look, your audience data really matters. How you manage your budget really matters. But you know what? Your behaviors really matter as well. And I can point to all these things we've changed in the organization, starting with senior leaders. That means behavioral expectations are part of our business proposition. So that's where we're headed. We've done the same. Accountability was one of the new values that we put in. And that was because it was felt that an organization that had grown up maybe a little bit like a university or a little bit like the civil service, grown up around very talented individuals who made products. Accountability wasn't really a huge sell for this organization. It's a difficult sell. But we found the world has changed so fast that actually we need accountability to be absolutely central to what we do. And there, just to give you an example of the accountability measures, you know, hold your team accountable for your collective results, track progress, and give that timely, honest, regular feedback on both behaviours and performance. And we're all like, yeah, you know. And then when was the last time you gave timely, regular, honest feedback on somebody's behaviour? You know, when did you actually do it? And so from this work flows all of the training, all of the building of capability, all of the things we want to do now linked into expected behaviours and performance for the organisation. And I'll just whiz into the end. Important to have the Director General standing foursquare and saying the values underpin everything we do. That's absolutely critical. Obviously, it can't stop there, but it has to be there. And the OD imperative is, for all of this, you have to evoke change. It's got to be strategic and simple at the same time. I think the implementation has to be intelligent. There's nothing worse than showing up and not having a good working knowledge. As Aoife was saying, if you don't understand the strategy, just go away. You've got no right to be there. And also you have to be culturally sensitive about this work. So if I was to pitch up and talk about culture and values this week, when many hundreds of my colleagues work 12 days on the trot, just like, go away. Don't bother me with that right now. But there will be a moment when I'm ready to talk about it. I can't recommend enough this book if you are interested in organisation development and the stuff that I've been talking about. Very sadly, Mian Changjud, who we've been working with very closely, very sadly passed away recently from COVID. I really recommend this as a very simple textbook if organisation development is something you're interested in. And you can nearly flick to the part of the process you're doing and run down a list of things and think, all right, you know, I've done most of that, but actually I forgot to do that, or that's in the wrong order. So that can be very, very helpful. And then we've managed to get away with quite a lot by saying it's in beta mode. So that would be one of my top tips. This work, it's like never finished. It's never perfect. Everybody will always want to fiddle with it. So I've managed to get permission to just crack on by saying, do you know what, this is a pilot, or we're in beta mode. We're just trying this. We've managed to do that for about 18 months without anybody noticing. Eventually, it'll have to be the thing because we'll want to get to 24,000 people. But for now, in beta mode, activate your people early. Get in, get your early adopters and get them doing stuff. Get them to do big work on their real problems. That's what we're doing at the moment. It's all action, not words. It's nothing like this. It ought to be nothing like this, talking and not doing. It's about a long-term commitment. So if you've done something with the team, are you going back and are you going back again? And ask them for the data back. And then our watchwords are, this is about exploring with people. It's not telling. Don't bother doing it if you're not engaging them. Then enable them. And that might mean they need some skills. So we skill people up in facilitation. We've skilled them about how to present around our values. And then empower them, let them get on with it. So I've had calls from people saying, well, I hear you're going to Wales to talk about the values, but we're not ready. And I said, oh, no, it's absolutely fine. It's just a pilot for something about the values that will come later. And that's fine. That's totally fine. So just trying to empower people to go on and do good work has been very helpful. In a sense, you're trying to create a movement around change. It's the opposite of top down. The top down has to be there, but you're trying to co-opt people as you go. So you offer a range of support. You don't make the change, you offer the help to help other people make the change. And this is just an example of what we've done. For instance, if you want to do something, let's say you think inclusion is an issue in my area, people feel excluded. You can have a team leader session that you run yourself and we'll help you, we'll give you all the stuff. or we could support you with a workshop, or if it's really bad, we can give you the Spark team, which is an internal BBC sort of consultancy, which will do business process improvements. Or we can do deep listening, and we've done several of these, where we really get to the heart of some big behavioural issues, maybe sort of bullying. Or if it's something that really needs intervention, we can bring in some experts from outside. So there's a sliding scale there. We expect the specialist input, because it's expensive, to be less, lots more of the normal stuff as part of BAU. And then we always ask for sustainable change. We want to help on these interventions. So we want the stuff back. And then I'm not sure who said this, but I really love it. We're not doing culture change. We are humanizing the workplace, creating an environment where people can do brilliant work. So I love that. We try not to talk about culture change too much. First of all, because it's annoying. And also, how do you know? But you definitely know when your workplace has been humanized, when you're looking forward to being at work, even when the work is difficult, when people are respectful and they're living the values. That is genuinely a great place to be. So that's it from me, and look forward to hearing questions.
Thank you so much, Susan and Aoife. That was really, really insightful. Susan, I loved the little quote that you made about change there, that people do not resist change, but they may resist being changed. So that's a takeaway for me today. I'm gonna take a wee note of that and remind myself of that from time to time. And Aoife, really enjoyed your architectural analogy, and that resonates with me because I work in an architectural firm. I did also pick up from my research that there's a host of wealth of information on organisational design on the CIPD website, which you can all access. And they talk about that in a little bit more detail, and it really helped for me to understand, as someone who doesn't have subject matter expertise in this area, that kind of interface between organisational design and organisational development. And they say that an architect would look at drawing up plans for a new office, or for a new office building, but they would also look at the short term, the long term, how many people there would be, how that would feel, all before drawing up their building plans. And then when that building has been built, i.e. the implementation of the organisational design, that will be maintained and then improved. And that's where the organisational development and change piece comes into things. So that resonated for me, and I just thought I would share that with the audience today as well. And we will drop through a few links to the CIPD background information on this subject area. But for now, I want to move over to the panel and also welcome Erin and Faye into the discussion. So thank you very much for that. So straight off, I have some questions for you, Aoife, and then Susan, but I'll maybe share that out also to the other panel members to get us started. And in the meantime, can everyone please feel free to drop in your questions? They're coming through thick and fast there, and we try to cover as many as we can. So Aoife, we have a question from an audience member, which is based on your presentation and in relation to equity and co-creation. And the question is, how do you enable equity in co-creation?
Yeah, so when we're talking about co-creating, we're often thinking about, where are the opportunities we can bring people in. And to do that, we often put, kind of give people defined remits around where they can influence a change. So you might have made some big decisions around the org model and the kind of the high level groupings and divisions of work. But then when it gets to the next level down, you're going to run workshops where you're going to bring maybe some subject matter expertise in a particular different area, and ask them, say, look, you can design the process from this point to this point, and give them parameters around which they can make decisions and around how the work should be done. So that's you kind of give people the parameters around which they can, influence and shape the work themselves. And that's how we tend to do it. So it's and involving as many people as you can in that process as well, in the defined parameters to define their piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. I'd like to bring that, Faye, I'd like to bring you into that one, if I may, as well, because obviously in a consultancy capacity, you're dealing with a wide audience of people. So I'll just reiterate the question for you. How do you enable equity in co-creation?
So in my experience of what I've done over the last 17 years in NatWest, we built a whole program from nearly by accident, you know, so some of the things that the ladies were talking about there really do resonate with me, but equally, we built an entire curriculum for the bank based on the success of, if you nearly think about it like a little venture, people just had that empowerment and things that the ladies were talking about and just took the opportunity to try something. And it really made a difference to the organization and grew itself into a full curriculum. Entrepreneurship essentially is what it was. So anytime you click like on Facebook, you know, that's really entrepreneurship. That's somebody in Facebook who created that, not as part of their job, but actually as part of that empowerment about leading that strategic focus, making the business better. And then having that autonomy, that structure, those great leaders in place that allow you then to create that and go with that when you spot that business model that's really working. Is the organization built in such a way that you can really get behind that and see where it goes and don't stifle and kill that innovation, creativity, whatever it might be, that can really build something? And in that, then you get that co-creation, right? You get that the people that are on the ground, that are dealing with your customers every day, that are dealing with the complaints coming in, that are doing the do every day, they really feel that they're moving the business forward. So as Susan said, it's not that the top down has to be there for sure, but when you get something so empowering like bottom up and you see those solutions, you could be market first, you could be market leading, but the business has to get behind that and support the business to do that. So things like, and Aoife was chatting about it, reward, promotion, how do you ensure that it's collaboration and not competition? You know, all those things are so important. And that's really where I see that ODHR can really get behind those brilliant areas of the business that can do this really well and support them so that it is sustainable and it creates growth, not just a flash in the pan as well.
Thank you. Just checking you can hear me. I'm not sure if I'm muted. You can hear me, great. Thank you. So there was another question there and it came in, if I can find it, from George Alexander, and it was in and around creating a burning platform for change, and what top tips do you have for doing so? And I'd like to go to back to Faye on that one, because I think it probably leads nicely from what you'd said there, and then invite Aidan into that conversation as well, if I may.
Thanks. So obviously there needs to be a capability piece here, right? So how do we ensure that all our folks, they have the time and the space and the capability to have their eyes open, to look for those problems that Aoife was talking about, you know, scan that horizon, what's going on out there, what could we be doing better? So there has to be that space to enable that. And equally then forums, you know, innovation platforms, things like that, competitions, hackathons, business days, you know, all of those sorts of tools can really let the business hear what their staff themselves, what ideas are they coming up with. And that's what we do is we come along and help you do those things and really hear from your staff. And you know, a hackathon or a business problem day where you give a problem statement out to teams, there's pizza and beer, it's a good bit of competition. You can really start to see that energy build, and that can really give that energy and create the platform for everything really to take off. But of course, it can't just be say, it has to be actions. Again, what Susan was saying, you know, it really does have to be backed up by actions. If you hold a hackathon and you have winners and next thing nothing happens with the ideas, they're not taken forward, nobody's listened to, that can just kill that creativity and innovation. So you need to be mindful of that, create those platforms, really get the energy and the organization behind it, but follow it through. Again, otherwise it can just be seen as a bit of a flash in the pan, and that can demotivate your staff very, very quickly. And maybe they would look for other opportunities where their creativity, their energy will be rewarded.
Absolutely, some fantastic tips there, Faye. And Aidan, if maybe gone to you second is unfair, because they've come with quite a few there. So I would invite you to add to that, but I would also follow that up, Aidan, with a question from Philip Lennon, which is, how do we overcome resistance, especially, for example, from employee reps or union reps as well? And I'll invite Aidan into that one, and I'll maybe touch base with you again, Susan, on that one to see if you came up against that. But go to Aidan first.
So I suppose I'm going to reference then Susan's presentation in that and say that actually for change to be worthwhile, it should be addressing something that is significant and is important. So it's not change for change's sake. I suppose that the idea of maybe creating a burning platform for me is not so much about, creating that, but it's about identifying what people are feeling the squeeze about, what people are feeling pressure about, what people are feeling their frustration over. And I often say to people, what just really makes you want to bang your head against the wall? Because why do you want to keep up with that? Well, let's change it. Let's move on from there. I mean, sometimes they're not always aware about the reasons for change at a very strategic level, about opportunities that may exist out there, about changes to the business environment or to what is happening to the bottom line. And there's a communication and an opening up process around that. But actually often they are so much more in tune with what the opportunities could be for that are out there in terms of what customers want, and also as a customer themselves, because our staff and employees are also customers, what they would want. So all those ways of tapping into that, I think are really important. And Orla, I'm sorry, but I think there was a second part to that question.
I think you picked up very, very nicely. It was really the second part was the piece around the change and how we deal with that resistance to change.
Yeah, there's a very simple rule of thumb, I suppose, with change. There's lots of change models. I love reading about them. I love hearing how they have worked, and there's not one that I don't think, right, yeah, that's so smart. But it is, as has been said already, it sometimes just comes down to one conversation at a time. And if there is that resistance, I think, and this may be just, personal experience of some organizations I've worked with recently, but because the union reps were mentioned, I think there's almost, an adoption of roles of kind of sometimes we're pushing for something and you're pushing against it. And it's about breaking that down and asking for help and support, and in doing that, being totally open to listening, not just seeking to hear, but to really understand where the issues are, why there are issues, why there are concerns. And I've worked through processes where it's taken 14 months to get that engagement and that involvement. It was the original Gantt chart kind of had it slotted in for 2 weeks. And it took 14 months to get there. But I have no doubt that the outcome was actually better because the project, the work, the engagement of all the people involved had to, I think Susan was talking about that as well. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't something that happened as a result of the change, that we looked at kind of the organization and how it was going to be received. It was very integral to the planning of the change. And the project changed, the direction of it changed because of that input. But it was very painful. I won't deny it, but I think it was worth it in the end up. And we had to, as I said, I think we just had to get ourselves, first of all, into a place where we were being really open with each other. And it wasn't about two sides of the table. It was about coming together to kind of identify how can we improve things for the individuals in this organization, and really seek to understand what their input was on that.
Mm-hmm. And it's no mean feat, that time period just really demonstrates the commitment that does need to go into this as a piece of work. Susan, in your experience in the case study at the BBC, what types of resistance of change did you come up against, and how did you deal with those? Yeah,
so just building on what Aideen said there, so obviously we've got quite active unions and journalism unions and BETCHA and all of that. So we basically opted for early transparency. We found it useful to work with the subcommittee, actually, of the unions who wanted to talk about this change. And you're absolutely right, they'll have identified all the things that needed to change anyway. they'll just be a lot crosser that the organisation hasn't dealt with them. So we went in early, and actually we had that experience of the unions saying it was the opposite of resistance to change. It was, yeah, excellent, but why haven't you done it? And we don't believe it will be done. So I think one of the tricks, not a trick, but one of the things that's worth trying to work on is, what are the early wins that you can show your good faith and that you're going to be able to deliver? You won't be able to deliver the whole thing at the beginning, but is there something, or is there enough, or is there a form of engaging them that begins to reassure people that you're not messing about, that you're in for the long term, that you're serious, and that you're going to come back? And I think it's partly that's relationship building, isn't it? So, and I've certainly found that to be very useful. My only frustration is it's difficult to deliver those quick wins. And when you've got them, you've got to really realise what you've got and create a narrative around them, so you don't miss the fact that you've done something, you haven't done everything. So that would be my experience. And then the other resistance, in a way I love, because my background is journalism and I'm, very familiar with being a journalist, rolling their eyes at anybody talking about anything to do with anything corporate. So I kind of love that when I see it, because I think it's so honest, and I see that as a challenge. And really my measure is, I used to actually be in charge of Radio Foyle and Radio Ulster. And I think about the people getting those bulletins out, and I think, don't go to the organisation if you can't offer them something that they need. And we're not ready yet to roll it out for that reason. I think you've got to hold back. You get one chance really. Can you offer something to people who are naturally resistant to change, where they will say, do you know what? Actually, I can see the value of that, either to me or to somebody else. And that takes quite a bit of work, and also a massive simplification of your work. Because all the stuff that the CEO thinks is great, no one else is going to know about. What is the thing that makes a difference to the person sitting in Radio Foyle? My predecessor, I think, probably did one of the greatest things, which was, we have a box now in an application form. We have to untick it for flexible working. This was pre-pandemic. I just thought that was the biggest change. It was pre-ticked for, I would like to be considered for flexible work. I just thought it was amazing. So some of these things can be incredibly simple and embedded in process. And in the end, I think it's probably the process and system changes that really are the things that people notice the most in the end. Did I get paternity leave? Was I considered an equal in my job? It's that kind of stuff. So I think my boss has described it to me as saying, make sure there's enough sort of sprinkles on the top, there's enough sort of sparkly things that gives everybody comfort that you're doing something that will deliver for everybody. Long-winded way of saying, do a little bit very well across the whole organisation. That helps with resistance.
Perfect. I'm just picking up on some of the comments that you made in terms of the stakeholders across the business as well, Susan. So I guess I'm going to put this question on to Faye next. But when we look at the role of HR versus business leaders, what do we think about that dynamic, and who should lead on this? How should that work? Is there a best practice?
Sorry, I thought Susan was going to pick up on that to begin with. I've seen it work both ways. I think there's different considerations when it comes from the business and it's led from the business. As I said earlier, that support has to be there for those people, great leaders, strong guidelines, that autonomy, decision-making, reward, promotion, that all still has to be there. Otherwise, it can be a little bit of a flash in the pan. Everybody feels great for 6 to 18 months. And then how do they move forward in the organization? How do they know what they've achieved? How do they get rewarded for that? So yeah, it can definitely needs both. I think as well, to have those great leaders in the organization that can provide that autonomy as well is just so key. Those guidelines are there, especially, I worked in a regulated environment, a regulated industry, but regulation isn't an excuse to not do these things. It just has to be considered as well. So if the business, HR, OD, those guys can really get behind and support the business that have struck on that piece of goal, that piece of growth, whatever it might be, and just really get behind them and support it, then it's much more likely to succeed. But equally, you have to make sure that it's sustainable. and that the people that do it will stay. You know, there's that great quote, you know, what if we train our people and they leave? Well, what if we don't and they stay? You know, you still want your people to keep moving forward and growing your business. That's what they're there for. But there has to be guidelines and understanding around that so that everybody, you know, knows exactly where they stand and how they can progress their own careers as well as that of the organisation.
Irene, that must be something that you come up against as well in the role of business leaders versus HR in organisational design issues and change. What insights do you have?
And I would probably say it goes further than that, because as a consultant, it feels sometimes like we are dipping in and then pulling back out again as well. I'm very conscious that even within HR, within a change team, that we are part of that team, but only for a relatively short period of time. And yeah, and it is something that is absolutely the forefront of what we do, is that we create that sustainability, that you know, the approach needs to be pragmatic and it needs to be real, and to meet those criteria, then it has to be sustainable and has to be long term. And I think that is one of the hardest parts, is about kind of identifying those champions, those people who are up for it. And I kind of, this overlaps with a previous question, but it is, you know, in terms of overcoming resistance, etc., it is about working out what is in it for me, because it shouldn't feel like, you know, a change project as such. It should just feel like they are making life better for themselves and the people around them. And if you can kind of find that way of identifying the what's in it for me piece, I think then you really tap into, you can kind of tap into that desire to change, to really kind of want to make it happen. And you can then look at what you can do to facilitate that, because the upskilling, the capacity, the space to do it, and a little bit around maybe the methodology to help and support in doing that needs to be provided. So the way that we would work, knowing that we're only kind of jumping in and jumping back out again, would be to kind of work with individuals within the organisation who can lead on that, but create the ownership across the board.
Thank you, Irene. That leads us nicely on to the next question, which I'm going to put to you, Aoife, and it's really around, you know, what does success look like? How do we measure success? And most importantly, what do we do if we get it wrong?
From an org design perspective, I suppose when we're thinking about success, we are in the design process, we're going back to that strategy piece. So when we're designing our org model and the teams within it, one of the outputs that we will produce early on is what we call like a functional mandate, team mandate. So we will really be clear on responsibilities of the team as one element of it, the kind of intersection with the other teams and how they're going to work together and be successful. But we'll also call out and kind of spend time working with the teams to set out what those KPIs are. So how are we going to know if this team is going to be successful and have really key KPIs? So that's from an org design perspective. The more we're designing, we're thinking about benefit success. It's really about being clear and articulate as part of the design process on what are the KPIs, the success measures. But then I think, as we spent a lot of time talking about here as well, is that what's really important from an org design perspective is all that change management piece that we wrap around, and not just, you know, during the design piece and bringing people in, but through implementation and then beyond, which is, you know, what Susan was talking about, and the work that you do, you know, to embed change on an ongoing basis in an organization. So for me, the success in the design phase is KPIs for the team, but it's also the change management and getting that right, and identifying all the activities that you need to do to ensure that you have good change adoption within the organization that you're introducing the org design into.
And can I just open that out to the other panel members? Are there any other measures of success that you would include?
I think, Orla, I would maybe include for organisational development something very simple. I think about 20% of any business should have a working kind of knowledge of people-centred change. I think 20% you can get to the rest through the 20%, so that you sort of trying to work yourself out of a job, really, because coming in as specialist, you don't need to be a specialist. I don't think, to get about 80% of this done. But if you miss it, you can't do it later. So that would be the golden place, I think.
Thank you, Susan. So I am conscious of time, folks, so I'm probably going to put this as our last question, and I do apologise if there's any time we'll get any last minute questions in there that I have missed, but I'm going to put this out to each of the panel members, and this really is around, you know, what the future holds. So what future trends do we think we may see in organisational design, and what predictions do you have for the coming years? And I'll go to Faye first for that one, if I may.
Well, my passion is entrepreneurship and this searching for a business model. You know, I don't really believe anymore that we all know exactly what our business model is and we just are able to wake up one day and implement it. You know, I really believe that searching for the right business model, getting our larger organizations to function a little bit more like smaller businesses, but all just working towards the same purpose or strategy, things like that is where my passion and expertise really lies. And I'm seeing that small change. There's lots of white papers, you know, articles coming out about entrepreneurship in larger organizations and things. And I really do think if we can get our big organizations looking at that, understanding how that might influence some of their structure, but equally, you know, roles within their teams and within their organizations, I think that'll preempt a bit of a sudden shift. You know, there's always that things floating around in the background, and then we call it the tipping point. If you think about even, you know, free from food, veganism, lots of things, it's about there, and then all of a sudden it's everything. And that's where you don't want to be caught out. So I think for me, I feel that entrepreneurship is out there. There's lots of work being done by the European Union on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, you know, just for citizens, never mind organizations. So I think it's definitely an area that we should all be looking at. And as I say, that's where my own passion lies. So I think that's what I would ask people to keep an eye out for that.
So we can expect to see the word entrepreneurship coming into our vocabulary in the coming years.
There. If it's not already there, absolutely.
Super. Well, certainly we all know a lot more about it today, Faye, having listened to you. And I'm going to move over to Aideen next, if I may. Aideen, around your predictions and your thoughts for what the future may hold.
Well, I'm actually almost weary about hearing about, you know, I'm fed up of living in an unprecedented time. It just seems to kind of one unprecedented time seems to roll into another to the point that it no longer rings true. But when you think about the last 10 years and the huge amount of change that the environment in which we operate has experienced, whether that's to our borders, to the ways of working, to our ways of coming together and connecting when we couldn't do it in a physical way, to tech, to the way that we use data, never mind customer requirements. And it still surprises me that the vast majority of us work in an organization that has a very kind of hierarchical structure, you know, with a CEO, different functions or teams, with leadership, etc. And yet I also, despite that, I also hear so many organizations come to us and say, we need to break down the silos, we need to work collaboratively, there are opportunities here, we can't let them go, we need to be able to jump on those and respond to those appropriately. And I think actually that one of the key changes in terms of org design will be around, the structure itself will need to become ever-changing and adaptable, and it'll be that flexibility of approach. So there's a lot being said at the minute about network teams who come together quickly, who they join and they form and they deliver and they disband. But it is a massive shift to kind of build that kind of approach within, and compared to the hierarchical organizations that we have. It presents a heap of really interesting challenges, I think, as well, in terms of culture, the role of leaders, team effectiveness, and even employment contracts, kind of assuming that not everybody will be a permanent member of the team as they come in to effect a change or to deliver on something and then move on. Absolutely.
And the whole concept of agility in the workforce and this kind of idea of what agile means can vary so massively across different organizations. And when you're talking through that network teams, you know, I'm immediately thinking of my own organisation and how those projects would work. So yeah, very, very insightful there, Aideen. And I have to say, I'm with you. I'm in camp Aideen when it comes to unprecedented times. We talked about words that might be coming into our vocabulary. If we could move that one out of our vocabulary and remove it from the English dictionary, I would be more than happy, as I'm sure many others would be. So I'll move on over to Susan, if I may, and invite your thoughts on what the future may hold.
Thank you. And my battery's running low and I thought I was plugged in. So if I'm taken off air, I do apologise. I think my long-term view is there can't be any change that's not people-centred change. So organisational development's in its infancy. It will have to grow and we'll all have to get much better at it. Stress, overwhelm, unhappiness in the workplace, the next generation coming through. Stress has gone mainstream. Maybe it was executives before and some people who are being bullied. Everyone is strung out. And we will not be able to create the organisations we need unless we are able to make the change in a culturally sensitive way that's intelligent, that's strategic and simple. Basically that. So I think there's everything to hope for, but I think we need to get much better, much faster at how people actually feel at work.
Thank you. And I know that's something that many organisations are very, very driven and focused to tackle and really genuinely and authentically support their people at this time particularly. So thank you very much, Susan. I'm glad that we managed to keep you there and not have your battery die on you. So Aoife, last but not least, I want to invite your thoughts and what reflections you may have about what the future holds.
Yeah, that's fine. And look, not to reiterate anything that's been said already, but I do agree on that piece around that kind of pace of change being so rapid and really increased over the last few years. I suppose one of the things we've noticed as a result of that is obviously strategy cycles reducing and organization design becoming not a 5-year thing, but a 3-year thing, and actually really probably moving towards something that organizations do more health checks on a regular basis. So we're seeing clients we've done work with in the past ask us to come back a year later and just kind of do a health check on, is that working, is it not, how is it not working, do we need to tweak it? So I think it's a trend of, rather than organization design being something we do once every 5 years, it's something that's much shorter timeline and it's just we're tweaking rather than leaving something to go stale. I think the point Aideen made on the agility, we're seeing that as well in networked organizations and learning from the kind of big consulting firms and how you pull people together from projects from various different disciplines within an organization rather than keeping them in their functional silos. And yeah, I think that's interesting. The guys have covered my other points. So yeah, that they were the big things, just the health checks and the reducing the time of organization design, exercising it, and it being a more ongoing thing rather than a once in a few years thing.
Thank you, Aoife. I just want to say thank you so much, guys, on the panel. You have made a subject area, which to me was, I'm not going to lie, a little bit intimidating, a little bit overwhelming. What is this organisational design all about? And you've really brought it to life during this panel discussion and during your presentations there. So thanks very much to the panel. I've also dropped a few links into the chat box, and I'm just going to hand back to Rob to close out today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Orla, and thank you very much to Faye and to Susan and to Aoife and to Aideen. It was intriguing to listen to your thoughts. I'm sure, and I'm just going to read my notes to you because I think it's quite comical. I wrote, in a world where such shifting horizons happen every day, it's important to us as people professionals that we continue to scan the horizon to make sure our structures and our systems and our processes are set up a way to deal with these unprecedented times. And I stopped writing there because at that point, Aideen said unprecedented times. So if that doesn't prove a point, that really does prove a point. But I personally got lots from that. We've still got a lot of the delegates online, which I think is testament to the brilliant presentations and panel discussions that we've ran this afternoon. So on behalf of the CIPD committee, we thank Susan from the BBC, we thank I'm not going to say this company name properly again. Aoife, I do apologise, but Aoife from Alaji, Faye from T3, and Aideen from Think People. Also, massive shout out to Orla for keeping us on time and making sure that we're running a tight ship and keeping us all right in the background. A big thank you and a big hats off to Alison and Ailish, who are keeping us going in the background and making sure everything looks like the professional operation that it is. Shortly after today, you will receive a feedback survey. We really hope that you will fill it in. After you fill it in, you'll get access to Aoife and Susan's slides. So if you want the slides, fill in the survey, you'll get them afterwards. A little bit of a hook there to get your thoughts. And I just want to put out the one little quote that I think Susan said in terms of being transformation is helping people to see the future and working towards it. And I think that really sums up the session really well in terms of trying to help business and the economy see a future and impact work and working lives positively. I will leave you on the thought of George, our colleague who's also on the call. George, our colleague who's also on the call, is facilitating a session on October the 12th on Total Reward. That's live on Eventbrite for people to register right now. So we'd encourage you to register for the next People Hub session. And apart from that, thank you very much for joining us all. And we will see you all at an event very soon. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.